So now we're up to Daf Mem Heyamid Beis. We're trying to figure out, according to Rav Sheshes, if everybody, both the Tanakama and even Rav Yossi, agree that the adornments for the purpose of idolatry of the mountain are separate entities and they're asur. What is the machlokas? That hacha be'ilon shenetola basof avaro pligi. The machlokas revolves about whether or not, in the case of an Asherah tree, the Torah prohibits the Asherah tree because it was, from its inception, created for the purpose of idolatry. Tanakama sovar ilon shenetol basof avaro muter. If the initial planting of the tree was not for the purpose of Asherah, it was for secular purposes. Let's say it would cut down the tree and make wood out of it and so forth, then it's mutter. Rabbi Yosef Haglili Sovar, according to Rav Sheshes, Elon Shenetola V'Sofa Varo also. When the Torah includes Asherah, a tree, under the category of the Isra Avoda Zara, it doesn't differentiate between whether the guy's intention when he first planted the tree was for the sake of idolatry or not. Meanwhile, what led Rabbi Yossi Haglili to this chumrah? Now watch what just happened. According to Rav Sheshes, everything went upside down, because before Rav Sheshes, on Amun Aleph, we assumed that Rabbi Yossi Haglili was the Mekil. But now, right, in terms of the question of Tzipui Har, but now we're assuming that Rabbi Yossi Haglili is machber in expanding the definition and the scope of the Isra Avoda Zara of Asherah to include even a tree that was initially, at the time of the planting, without any intention for Avodah Zarah, but later on it was worshipped. And now we're going to try to analyze, where did Rabbi Yosef Haglili come to, how did he come to this conclusion? If we look at the words of the Seifa, it says Mipnei Ma Asher Asura, Mipnei Sheyesh Bo Tfisas Yad Adam, V'chol Sheyesh Bo Tfisas Yad Adam also. The drasha here differentiates between a mountain and a tree. In the case of a tree, it was a human intervention in nature that was responsible for creating that tree. It wouldn't have been created without the human planting. And that is all we need to know to set up the Asherah as a separate entity, not included, not to be compared to a mountain. So therefore, what happens is that since it was a human effort that planted the tree and brought it into existence, therefore Rabbi Yosef Haglili is going to argue that now it no longer has the status of a har or anything of that sort that was created by the Almighty, by God, and is totally attached to the karka, but rather it's something that was created by man. And therefore, if it's not like a har, we wait until Chas Shalom it was worshipped, and once it was worshipped, it's also Kol sheyesh bo tfisas adam lasuye mai lav lasuye ilun shenetol l'basof avodo. So this is the ribui and the expansion of the scope of the Isra Avoda Zara of Rabbi Yosef Haglili, that even though it was not initially planted for the sake of Avoda Zara, since subsequently it was worshipped, therefore it's awesome. And now the Gemara wants to tell us that there's another Rav Yossi, but this is not Rav Yossi from the Galil, but rather Rav Yossi ibn Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Yehuda. Savar Elon Netol Sof. So he agrees with Rav Yossi. So the two Rav Yossis are in agreement. The Sanya, we learned to the Brisa Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda Omer. Mitoch shenemar, it says Eloheim al heharim, and this al heharim is going to teach us that the mountain itself does not become prohibited. It's only something on top of the mountain, which were the adornments that we spoke about before. Or velo heharim Eloheim, and the same drush we're going to have on Eloheim al gvos, velo gvos Eloheim. So the hills themselves, even though they were worshipped, did not become us. Shomei ani, I would say that if we apply the same diuk and the same methodology, the same, let's call it fancy English, hermeneutic principle, to the other part of the pasuk, which says, Tachas kol eitz ranon Eloheim. So the tachas would seem to indicate that something at the base of the tree is prohibited. So let's say, for example, we dig down to the base of the tree and we find sort of getchkas there or whatever. But for low eitz ran and Eloheim. Now the eitz itself, the tree itself, is not subject to the Isur of Avoda Zara. Talmud Lomer, therefore the Torah had to go out of its way to include the Asherah, meaning the tree itself, under the law of Avodah Zarah, because it says Ashreim Tisrafum Ba'esh. Now Rashi here in this sugya is a little bit confusing because there's another pasuk of Ashreim Tigadeun, which means we have to cut down the trees that were worshipped, and yet there's a pasuk Ashreim Tisrafum Ba'esh. So at some point or other we have to figure out why the Torah to give two psukim to prohibit an Asherah tree. And not only to prohibit it, but it has to be burned. And this, by the way, is a Mishnah also in the third parak of Sukkah, that the Mishnah says if you take a lulav and cut off the lulav from an Asherah tree, you cannot use it for the mitzvah of Lakatim Lachem because of Kituse Mechta Shiura. A lulav has to have a shear for tfachim, but now that it has to be burnt as an Asherah, then it doesn't have a shear. In any event, let's just summarize. It comes out that the Brisa is quoting Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and he basically comes to the same conclusion as Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that even though the tree was not planted for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, nevertheless, it's not permitted if afterwards, subsequently, it was worshipped. So the Gemara asks, "Tachas kol eitz ranan loma." But why did the Torah say something confusing to us? That only tachas eitz ranan is prohibited, as if to say above the ground, that which is growing above the ground is not prohibited. We're saying now that even though it was created by man, because it was created by man, even though its initial planting was not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, it's asur. So why did Torah confuse us by implying a mute that it's got to be tachas kol eitz ranan? And the Gemara answers, "Hahu kid Rabbi Akiva di asam Rabbi Akiva ani ovdin v'yodan lefanecha kol makar shadabotzi agava v'giva nasa v'yeitz ranan dash yesham avos kocha." When the Torah says tachas kol eitz ranan, it was giving us a hinter as to where we're going to locate, where we're going to find the Avodah Zarah that we have to destroy. And the Torah is telling us that if you look under these trees, at the base of the tree, somewhere dug down, that's where they keep their idols. Okay, now let's just summarize the following point. Rabbi Yossi, Ibn Rabbi Yehuda, derives from the pasuk that the Asherah tree is prohibited, even though it was not planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. But we have to point out that although the two Rabbi Yossis agreed to that chumrah, but it was the Tanakama who was makil. So the Gemara therefore asks Rabbanan Hai Vashreim Tisrufu Beish My Avdi Bei. What are they going to do with an explicit pasuk that says that you have to destroy the Asherah trees and you have to burn them up in smoke? I mean, you're telling me now that since it was planted for an innocuous purpose, therefore there's no Isur. So why did the Torah say destroy the Asherah tree? Meaning that later on, subsequent to its planting, it was designated as an Avodah Zarah. And the Gemara says, only when the Torah says, Ashreim Tisrufu Beish, it was only addressing the case of a tree that was planted specifically and with the full intention of being worshipped as an Asher. Gemara now says, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Nami mi boile lahachi. Why not use that pasuk to indicate that dafka because it was planted for the purpose, then it becomes asur? And the Gemara says, Hachinami, if we only had the pasuk of Ashreim Tisrufum Ba'esh, and you may remember before that we said there were two psukim that mandate that we burn the Asherah tree. Says Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, the Chacham would be right if there was only one pasuk. and then it would be Elon Shenitola Basof Avodo Minole. Then we'd ask for a second pasuk, which Rabbi Yossi Aglili or Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda is going to darshan to teach you that even if the Asherah tree was planted for an innocuous purpose, it's still also once it was worshipped, and that's nafka because the second pasuk that mandates burning the Asherah is coming to include even that case. Ezo eitz shegiduo osur v'ikaro muter. The Torah is saying tigadeun. Now tigadeun indicates that you have to cut down the tree, as if to say the base of the tree itself, what maybe we'll call it the trunk of the tree, is not prohibited. What does that mean? That makes no sense at all. So therefore, what we're going to darshan here is that Hevi Omer Elon Shenitola Basof Avoda, that according to the Rabbanan, when the Torah says Tegadeun, it's trying to tell me that the base of the tree is mutter, and it's not subject to Avodah Zarah because it wasn't planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah.
Can I just ask? So is that any item, not just an Asherah tree, that if you make the item nothing to do with Avodah Zarah, but somebody decides to worship the item, it becomes aser?
I'll tell you, every other item, that I know of, is what's called tolush. Tolush means it was never attached to the ground.
Mm.
So you're right, in a sense, we should have said, wait a minute, if it was originally created for the purpose of just using it as a utensil, it should be mutter. But the answer is, anytime not you, I don't mean you, but anytime one worships an item, it becomes also for Avodah Zarah, unless it's mechubel lekarka. Because once it's mechubel lekarka, then we compare it to the mountains,
Right.
which the Torah was matir. So the Gemara now asks a kasha on Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Vaha, Vashreim Tisru Beish Kanosiv La Talmuda. It's very funny that, you quote two different psukim, but originally Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, he used a different pasuk. He didn't use V'Ashreim Tigadeun, but rather he used the pasuk Ashreim Tisru Beish. So the Gemara answers, Ilu lo nemar ka'omar. What was he saying? He was saying that if we only had the pasuk of Ashreim Tisrufu Ba'esh, v'lo nemar Tisrufu Ba'esh. If we only had the pasuk of Tigadena, we didn't have Ashreim Tisrufu Ba'esh. Hayisi Obar would come to the mistaken conclusion that Ashreim Tigadena. And what's Ashreim? That's only because its original intention at the time of its planting was mitchil lekach, for purposes of Avodah Zarah. But now the Torah goes ahead and expands it and includes Ashreim Tisrufu B'Eish, anything that is an Asherah, which means it was now worshipped, even though originally it was not planted for the purpose of worshiping. Is Aisi Le Ashreim Tegaden Le'ilun Shenetol Basof Avoda. So even though it was originally planted for innocuous purposes, now at the end he worshipped it, and the Torah adds the pasuk Tigadeun for Rabbanon. According to Rabbanon, the pasuk Tigadeun is totally superfluous. We're going to only use Ashreim Tisru Ba'esh, and that's going to teach me Ashreim because it was originally planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. Is Hai Ashreim Tigadeun Ma'avdi? What are they going to do with that pasuk? Lichid Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Kidue Avodas Kochavim Kodmim Lekibush Eretz Yisrael. So now we're going to get into a discussion here about the mitzvah of destroying idols. At what point in time, when Yoshua conquers the land and destroys the Amorites who have all these idols, at what point should he be destroying the idols, or let's go beyond that, at what point should he be seeking out the idols and uprooting them from the ground? And the answer is kibush Eretz Yisrael kodem lebir de avodas kochavim. At the first stage, all they have to do is, destroy those obvious idols. Obvious meaning that they're not hidden. Only after the kibush, which is 7 years later, only at that point do they become obligated to uproot idolatry, which means to seek out, under the ground and on top of the mountains and so forth and so on, to seek out the Avodah Zarah and destroy it. Tisani Rav Yosef, we had a brisa that Rav Yosef brought to our attention. V'nitatztem es mizbochechem v'hanach. When the Torah says that you take the altars that you find when you cross the Jordan and break them up into small pieces, v'hanach, the Torah says you can leave those pieces. You don't have to destroy them. But then, after kibush, after you conquer the land, then v'shibartem es matzavoseim, then you're going to have to totally destroy. So the pasuk here is interpreted as saying hanach. So the Gemara points out right away that the word hanach cannot be interpreted literally. V'hanach sal kedaito, sreifa boy. What do you mean? Leave it. You got to destroy it. Omer Rav Huna, ridofi achakach srof. For sure, you have to burn it. But at this stage, you're just going to break it down. That's going to be like stage number one, a temporary stage in the process of destroying Avodah Zarah. Then we're going to do the kibush of Eretz Yisrael. And following that, we're going to run and pursue all these idolaters until we discover where they hide their Avodah Zarah. Now, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda said that when it tells you that Ashreim Tegadeon, it means that even if it was not planted originally for the sake of Avodah Zarah, is Haisvarim what? I mean, only how does he therefore derive the conclusion that only in the second stage, post kibush, do you actually eradicate the Avodah Zarah, whereas in the first stage you just break it down? Nafkle, he derives it from me'abed ta'abedun. And why the double language, abed ta'abedun? Says Rav Yossi, abed v'achach ta'abdun. There's a double process of destruction. The first process, the first stage before the kibush, is only to break apart the mizbechos, the idolatrous altars. And then after kibush, there's a second abed, in which we have to burn everything. For Abanon, why did the Torah bother with a double language? Hami Baile, they needed lo oker avodas kol chav shetzarich l'sharish achrel. The double ibud is telling you that it's not enough just to look at the surface, find and locate, identify the avodah zarah, and then destroy that, but rather you have to l'sharish achrel. L'sharish achrel means literally to uproot it. Uprooted from beneath the ground. For Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, l'sharish achrel, how do we know the Torah obligated us to dig up underground and discover and surface the avodah zarah to destroy it? Nafkale, he derives it from mi'ibadatem eshmam min hamakom hahu. So now we're going to have a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim about how to interpret this pasuk. V'ibadatem, you should obliterate shmam. So according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, this pasuk is teaching me l'shari shachra, that we have to go under the ground and uproot the idolatrous objects. And that, according to Rabban, is not necessary, because they're going to derive that from the double language of Abed Ta'abdun, which Rabbi Yosef doesn't have the luxury of doing it, because he needed Abed Ta'abdun to learn about Kibush Eretz Yisrael. So for Rabbanon, the Gemara wants to know, what are the Rabbanon going to interpret? And the answer is, look at the pasuk. The answer is right there. It's staring us in the face. It says, the Badatem Eshmam. We're not talking about the idols themselves. We're talking about Shmam, the name of the idol. What does it mean to destroy the name of the idol? You've got to come up with a pejorative name for the Avodah Zara Desanya, as we learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Minayla Oker Avodas Kolchom Shetzarach L'Shari Shachrea Tamilomar V'Ibadetem Eshmam. So again, this sheet of Rabbi Eliezer will concur with the original shita of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda that learns from this V'Ibadetem Eshmam that you have to obliterate even the shroshim, even that which you find on the ground. But the Chachamim, as we'll see in a minute, represented by Rabbi Kiva, are going to derive something entirely different from the pasuk V'Ibadetem Es Eshma.